security.
We don't have to, yeah, I haven't,
Oh, did I not? I said reply to all on the chain. Let me make sure.
did you get it?
Pepperoni on the pizza.
Actually,
Lauren Kelly, Rebecca Blair.
yeah, we didn't get it.
Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't press send. I had it up, I didn't press send. All right, see if you get it now.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so you said security K?
Security K, it'll be security K, and then I believe on my 2NC it's, let me actually check if it's New Libs or prison next. It'll be prisons and then New Libs.
Okay. Security, prisons,
Security,
near
prisons,
Lib.
New Libs, yes.
Give a chance to be moving into a place in Red Hook by the end of the month, which I'd be very happy with.
Okay. I am ready when everyone else is ready. Our security case solves for your advantage. If you vote out, the impact they explain will happen. This all comes down to the justifications to solve for marijuana. They make these large claims such as the incarceration of African Americans and dependency upon exploitation that actually are formulated and created by trying to claim to solve these problems. We can solve based upon an individualistic model. Joe Schmo walking on the street looks at the news and sees that we need to solve marijuana to solve racism, war, and whatnot, and knows that he can't solve for these sort of impacts, so he doesn't try. But what Joe Schmo can do is change his ideologies about such a controversial issue such as marijuana. If Joe decides that marijuana should be legalized because of autonomous reasons, so we not let the state control our decisions, he can start these bottom-up movements that we need to solve for marijuana for the right reasons. This therefore prevents us legalizing marijuana to cause these very huge impacts that securitization solves, and we both solve marijuana without having to resort to these forms of violence, such as Iraq. George Bush originally justified going to Iraq because of oil. Oil was just a thing, but because George Bush says if we don't have oil, the U.S. economy will crash, he put this justification for putting boots in Iraq, which made this huge big war. If he didn't securitize that issue of oil, we wouldn't have this. In the same way is the securitizing this issue of marijuana. We need to solve marijuana for the right reasons. We agree, marijuana is this controversial issue that we can solve for, but in order to solve for, we need to solve it for the right reasons, which includes solving it because of autonomous reasons, because it's bad, because the state is controlling it, not because it's going to solve racism, not because it's going to solve anything. By doing this, the government puts fear into their lives. Our alternative is to start these bottom-up movements, these individualistic ways of solving problems by educating the hearts and minds of the people of America. We can solve these problems. Education is key. Fiat is real. If you vote for AF, we're changing the framework of this debate. If you vote for AF, marijuana doesn't actually solve. But if you vote for nay, you're voting for our education, our ontology becoming. That rather than trying to solve these problems based on politics and based on policy, we solve these problems based on changing the education, educating people about the real problems of marijuana. This by making these bottom-up movements that solve for these problems, these controversial problems that don't cause these impacts decisions. This is how our case solves for the impacts. Our big solvency for K is solving for their impacts. We use their impacts and so their impacts will happen if we legalize. Like I said, our all is to do this. In their Heller card, oh wait, never realize that. To go back against their one claim, no cards, their analytic that says security is good. We have. I want to point out to you judges that their impact claims are false and the app won't solve. Governmentality creates a cyclical market for security problematization and policy response. The analysis and the app solvency based on that analysis are based on a bankrupt epistemology and political ontology. Dillon and Reed, 2000. Policy demands reify problematization of life by turning the epistemically orderings of life into problems that require the continuous attention of policy science. The market for discourse is prescribed and police bidding to formulate problematization they seek to sell. Any problematization is capable of becoming a policy problem. Governmentality creates a market for policy, in which problematizations are looking for policy sponsors. The real problem with problematization exists precisely at the level of such a subject. What they do not have is the control that they want. We're saying that by saying securitization is good, they're saying that government is sovereign. They're saying that government has this ontology of being, that we know all, that we can predict everything based on empirical evidence, based on these assumptions of past human behavior, when in fact we can't predict the future based on human behavior, because human behavior is ever-changing and complex, and they're trying to use this linear epistemology, this ontology being that we can predict that this leads to this, that leads to this, that leads to this, that leads to, in this case, racial discrimination if we don't legalize marijuana. This invokes fear into people, and we justify selling marijuana in this, that creates a problem. We need to change the justifications of the reason we sell for marijuana. They don't do that via their plan. They're trying to treat the government as sovereign, and by doing that, the government's not solving, they're creating the problems. They're blind to this. They keep on arguing for that the government is good. They're blind to this. But the fact is, empiricism studies have no predictive value for scenario planning in international politics. Social phenomena are complex, don't conform to models, and our predictive variables cannot be identified in Bernstein 2000. 5 decades of well-funded efforts to develop theories on international relations have produced little in the way of useful high-confidence results. Theories abound, but few meet the most relaxed scientific test of validity. Even the most robust generalizations are close to trivial, have important exceptions, and are for the most part stand outside any consistent body of theory. The quest for predictive theory rests on a mistaken analogy between physical and social phenomena. It is often impossible to assign metrics of what we think are relevant variables. Most terms, rational actor, balance of power, are not descriptions of reality but implicit theories about actors in contexts that do not exist. The inevitable differences in interpretation produce widely varying futures. We have no way of knowing what wars could have occurred in the presence of appropriate catalysts. It is probably impossible to define the universe of what would be wars. Any regulatarities would be sought. They would be the outcome of processes that are embedded in history and have a short half-life. The risk in saying that the social scientists can predict the value of variables in past history is that the value of these variables is already known to us, and thus we cannot really be making predictions. Like I said, they're relying on the government to make these predictions, and they're relying on the government to solve these problems. And we as people let the government solve for all these problems, what will happen is the government will use these problems for their political agenda. That's what securitization is all about. Not about solving problems for the people, but by twisting political agenda around to enforce their political agenda. Another case of this is Obama's big securitization of the economy in 2008, 2009. Economy fail, economy will fail. You need to vote me, and then so the economy won't fail. But by doing that, instead of solving the economy based upon what the people want, by what the people need, he's using this securitization of the economy in order to influence his political agenda. Basically, by using politics, and that's just politics. That's not Obama. That's not Bush. Politics in general has this way of securitizing problems, and when in reality, the government's job is not to securitize problems, but to protect the individual rights of people. Let's say they have no objectification on our realism that realism is bad. Therefore, they can see that realism is bad. Therefore, we cannot. And because their app is inherently realist, we cannot. Their app is destroyed by this because realism is not inevitable or objective. I'm not even going to read that card because they conceded to our thing in our element card that says realism is bad. I said empiricism. All right, so let's go on to prisons. So even if you think that our framework is right, even if you think that we should focus on fiat, and even if you think that their policy will solve, even though they're complex, even though each problem is complex in itself, and that their linear epistemology, you think their linear epistemology can solve, even though we've proven that empirics they can't predict anything, they're all about empirics, and that linking these empirics to each other by putting it side by side does not mean one will link to each other. When we poked holes in their, what I'm about to do is poke even more holes in their thing, in their app. If by poking holes in that app, it's just proving further that securitization is what they're all about, and that their links don't actually connect to each other, but in fact are just this. They tell the story and to evoke fear to people. So prisons. So they conceded that they can't solve the root of racism. What we would do is, in our securitization, in our all, we would change we would educate people about the horrors of racism. The racism is exploitative. That's mean. That's not even just mean. That's a horrible word for it. But that it's exploitative. That it's objectifying, and that it's putting the people and these black people and African Americans into this social construct that they cannot escape out of. And so, in order to solve the root of racism, we have to educate people about the root of racism and solve for racism not because of through prisoners, not because of prisoners, not through instituting this policy. And I remind you, the government was the one that instituted Jim Crow laws in the first place. Were the ones that objectified African Americans in the first place. So they can't solve racism because prisons don't solve for all racism. Even if you think that prisons solve for a little bit of racism, like they said, that it's in the right step, that it doesn't solve for the root. Our alt would solve for the root. Moving on to neolib. They never answered our thing that their climate card. We use a climate card against them. Climate says that we cannot use small contractors. Their plan specifically says we ask them across it that they use small contractors. This is neoliberalism. This is capitalist. They don't solve for this because they are ignoring the fact that small businesses that grow marijuana are going to be advertising. Kleiman says that in this, they will advertise to say even, so they have to have prohibitions to stop advertising to say they don't do this, neoliberalism and capitalism will prevail.
Great. Cross-X?
Cross-X.
So your main, like your alternative is to just educate the population and that will solve, and then that will change. Wait, can you just explain that?
Yes, our alternative is to start these bottom-up movements, such as MLK's March on Washington, which started with educating the people about the horrors of racism, horrors of Jim Crow laws. If we do that, we can solve for the root of racism. You even can see that you don't solve for the root of racism.
So you don't think that that when Martin Luther King did try to educate people, that didn't do anything? Like that's
it did do something. It started
So
bottom-up
but
movement,
you're
March on
arguing
Washington,
that,
that actually
like-
solved things. Go ahead.
But that never solved racism, did it?
It solved a big
It solved a lot of it, and that's like what we're doing as well. But it didn't solve racism as a whole, right?
So you're thinking, but you don't say prisons, but you're not saying that prisons are going to solve for a whole either. You're saying prisons are
but you're
step in
saying
the right
that
direction.
you are solving as a whole.
Yes, we are. And eventually, when we educate enough people about the horrors of racism, racism will decline to the point where it doesn't have any significance.
But I mean, I feel like a lot of people in the U.S. have all been educated by about racism.
Then why is racism still prevalent?
Exactly, that's my point.
So we can educate them further about, not even just about racism, but
Okay,
about the
I'm
securitization
moving
of the
on.
government.
Can you just also explain your counter plan about?
You don't have the counter plan.
Oh, never mind, not counter plan. Sorry, your security kit.
Okay.
That like the changing of ideology, like.
You want to, I kind of
Like
can't
you,
just answer that.
Yeah, I know, but you answered it for racism, but like, how would education about marijuana change everybody's ideology?
Well, no, if we educate about the horrors of racism and about, instead of educating about marijuana, we should solve for this autonomous way that I explained in the 2NC, that we can't solve for racism, but we educate people about marijuana and the negs and the positives and negatives of it, we can make them justify legalizing marijuana for the right reasons, which is whenever they want to decide, we're not going to force them to think anything, but by educating them about the pros and cons of marijuana, they can make their own decisions, not make the government make decisions for them. By invoking fear into them, which is what securitization is all about.
Can you just clarify this as well? You're saying that governmentality, the government is. Actually, did you say social science can't make predictions?
Nothing. You can't make predictions. That was our whole thing about empiricism. That you can make predictions because of past human behavior. We have to stop making the governments make these predictions for us, because what it's doing is it's making these false assumptions about human behavior. And we read a part that said you can't predict on human behavior because human behavior is so complex and ever changing. And so try to make the predictions from that is just nonsense.
You can't predict an individual's behavior. Would you say that you can never predict?
Do you want to just prep on that and ask that?
No.
Okay.
Okay, you set for the 1 hour, or do you need prep?
I need to send it. Some of the cards I'll be